Before we dive into today's episode, we have some exciting news to share. Our spring cohort of the Next Economy MBA begins on March 28th, 2023, and we want you to join us. We designed the Next Economy MBA for entrepreneurs and change makers who are helping to create a world that works for all life. During this 9-month program, you'll learn practical skills on how to transform your organization into one that is just, equitable, and regenerative. Plus, you'll join an alumni community of over 400 impact leaders who are transforming organizations around the world. Interested in learning more? Visit lifteconomy.com/MBA to view our course curriculum and sign up for a free intro session with our facilitators. Thanks for listening, and now on to the show. Welcome to the MBA series. This is a special multi-part series within Next Economy Now. We are going to review the arc of the learning journey that is presented in the Next Economy MBA online course. We are open sourcing the content from our course and hope to share it in this shorter, bite-sized format. We are launching this series because we were asked to do it by listeners like you. We're also doing it because we are writing a book entitled The Next Economy MBA, Redesigning Business for the Benefit of All Life, which will be published on May 23rd, 2023 by Barrett Kohler Publishers. This is a sizable series. There will eventually be 18 podcast episodes of course content and 9 interviews with MBA alumni. We will be rotating every other week with our normal Next Economy Now interview format. We hope you enjoy it. Please reach out to us via our website, lifteconomy.com, with any comments, feedback, or requests. And now, on with the show.
Hello, and welcome to Next Economy Now. My name is Sean Berry, and I'm a partner at Lift Economy. Today, my guest is Teju Adisa-Farrar. Teju is an environmental equity consultant and independent researcher with a focus on sustainable textiles and environmental justice. She supports the creation of regional fiber systems and climate-resilient strategies for Black and Indigenous communities and people of the global majority. Having lived in several different countries, Teju uses a transitional lens that is informed by history, art, urbanism, and activism. Her work supports people, organizations, and companies who are making sustainable futures through textiles, alternative energies, alternative economies, regenerative agriculture, and community-centric organizing. Welcome to the podcast, Teju.
Thanks, Sean. Thanks for having me.
Great to have you here. So we'd love to start off by just hearing about your background and how did you get interested and involved in the work you're doing today?
Sure. Well, my institutional background is that I did a bachelor's in sociology and political social theory at Wesleyan University, and I focused on urban sociology and identity. And from there, I did a master's in urban, cultural, and environmental geography in this really dynamic 4 cities program in Europe, where we lived in 4 capitals of European countries over 2 years and got to do research in several others. And there my focus was the environment and mobility of Black artists and activists. But really my passion for this work comes from a combination of who my parents are and my personality. My parents are intellectuals, activists, creatives in their own right. So I grew up in a very politically aware household. And my personality was, as described by my family, a save the world syndrome. So from a very young age, I was very aware that the way that the world worked seemed unnatural to me and that we needed to change it. And so throughout middle school, high school, college, I was like, what is the best way to transform the world and also the conditions of the Black people that I live around, but who don't have the benefit to go to these nice schools like I did on scholarships. And so I was able to see different dynamics between communities as unfair and looked through different types of theories and frameworks to shift them. Sociology was one I started with in high school because I took a college course at a community college. And then geography really became a way that I felt like integrated a lot of the things that I had learned politically, socially, and economically, but also gave me a more tangible way to understand them as being based in the land and the environment that we all interact with and have shaped. And as I got older and became a young adult and became more active in the economy, I realized that the structure of the economy is really central in a lot of the social issues that I was seeing growing up and experiencing as well. And so I was like, oh, it seems like we need to just transform everything, especially the economy and especially the environment. So that's sort of how I came to be where I am right now.
I love that. Oh, we just need to change it all. Great.
Just a little thing. Just transform everything. No big deal.
Just a little bit. So how did you, or are you digging in? And maybe this is just a lead right into what are some of the things you're working on and how do you see those projects making a difference?
Yeah, I've had a heavy focus on regenerative fiber and sustainable textiles for the last several years. And really anything that provides an alternative model in terms of community, how we make things, and economic relations, I'm really drawn to. So my work currently in regenerative fiber and textiles, it's really centered on this project and development that we're hoping to launch soon called the Integrated Capital Fibers Fund. And this is a joint initiative between Fibershed and the Sustainable Agriculture Food System Funders managed by Mission Driven Finance with a really strong equity focus and vision about how do we support those who are transforming the fashion supply networks, who are creating alternative supply networks that are based in ecological balance, that are based in regional community resilience. And so the idea of the fund is that we offer different types of capital to small businesses who are working in soil-based natural fibers and dyes to give them technical assistance, capacity building, and loans for equipment and infrastructure so that they can scale, so that there are alternative systems to this current exploitive fashion supply chain that we all, for the most part, are forced to sort of work within. And so we're hoping that this fund can catalyze some of these small businesses and make it more tangible and accessible to folks to be able to consume clothing and textile-based products more sustainably, to know the folks who are making their clothing and their textiles and fibers, and also to support farmers and processors who are using techniques that mitigate climate change, essentially, that draw down carbon in the soil, grazing practices for sheep and lambs that make our wool, that actually allow the soil to regenerate and the microbes, the biodiversity to stay within the top layer of the soil. So simultaneously, we want to give consumers alternative options and then also try to regenerate some of the destruction that the current industry has created on this environment. So we're hoping that this can really catalyze this burgeoning industry of soil-based natural fibers, US-based, and hopefully down the line regionally based as well. So that's one of the things I'm working on that I'm really excited about and feel like is a good combination of some of the things that I've mentioned.
So soil, regional based relationships, knowing people who make your clothes, the economy. So this is the restructure of everything that was wrong, right?
Exactly.
Like you're hitting almost all of it. And you didn't mention food systems, but you're not going to redo the fiber system and then not, if you're taking care of the soil for fiber systems, then you're also going to take care of it for food systems, right? So then then there's a straight line there through health and wellness.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, community and culture centers around food. Sharing food
and food
together.
sovereignty. Yeah. And I think that's part of this idea of bringing fibers into the conversation about regenerative agriculture for our food, but also for all of our products, right? How do we integrate the fiber and food systems in a way that does keep reproducing the soil health? Because we know that when we have diversity in the crops that we're planting, when we're not using monoculture, actually it's better for our food and our fiber. So we recognize that fiber is deeply integrated into the food system, and we want to highlight that and lift that up as food justice and food sovereignty movements continue to grow.
And so this isn't a new idea, right? This is the old way. Your fibers came from your local region, just like your food. So I'd love to bring in the podcast you did, Black Material Geographies. Can you share more about that?
Yeah, so Black Material Geographies came mainly through a relationship I have with Stephen Satterfield, who is the founder of Whetstone Media. And we were both consulting to Fibershed and connected that way and found that we had so many overlaps in our interdisciplinary and land-based thinking around systems and how products are produced and consumed and the culture surrounding them. And he mentioned that he was creating a radio network and he thought I should talk about fibers and Black people as I do. And I was like, I don't really think people want to listen to that. He's like, I think maybe they do. And so I was like, okay, let's do it. And I was like, I just have to do this in the most Teju way possible. So it's going to be about all of the things. It's going to be about textiles. It's going to be about Black people. It's going to be about history. It's going to be about the environment. And it's going to be about transforming everything. And they were kind of like, okay, great. Like, as long as you could make it happen, you can make it happen. And so I basically just thought of all the people that I wanted to talk to, who, whether they're my friends, my colleagues, my father, my mother, my grandmother, people whose books I've read, how could I sort of, through a podcast, outline the way that I have developed my thinking around some of my values and some of my work? How could I create an arc of that to show people how I came to the thoughts and values that I have? And so I really use the podcast to do that, which is why it sort of started off with my dad and moved into Jamaica with my mom and my grandmother, and then through to my art teacher from when I was younger and natural dyers. So it really followed some of the life paths that I followed to develop my thinking. So that's sort of how it came to be.
I mean, I told you before, but I loved it. It was one of those things when I got a hold of it, I just like devoured it. I just listened to all 10 episodes, like binge style, and I shared it with dozens of people saying like, oh, you need to hear about this. So
Thank you.
what has the response been?
Positive. What I have heard from many people is that most of the things that I shared, they knew, but they didn't connect them in the way that I connected them. And I think that's something that I really feel like is a strength of mine. I think of myself as a connector. I don't think I really provide new information. I think I bring pieces of information and perspectives together and show how they work in a system, which is why I'm like, transform everything, because everything is interdependent, whether it's exploitative or healing. And so we want to use connection in a way that's healing. But right now, the connection of our economic systems, our education systems all work for exploitation and to create wealth for very few. So the response was, oh, I didn't think about all these things at once, but now I'm thinking about them at once. The other response on a completely different side was, I had no idea about the history of West African textiles. I had no idea that folks in Africa and India were actually the first people to be cultivating natural fibers. I didn't even really know what a natural fiber was, right? So there was these range of opinions. And I think the third overlapping opinion was, I didn't realize how much this applied to me, because we all wear clothes, but we don't really think about necessarily where our clothes come from besides the store. So that was really positive to hear that people felt a deeper connection to the thing that they take for granted that is mundane to them. So very, very positive responses thus far.
And so is there going to be a season 2 or?
I don't know. I don't know if there's going to be a season 2. I sort of just developed it as this one seasonal thing. And it was really an experiment. We didn't know if people were going to sit and listen and like it and share it. So I think I'm still getting feedback on that and want to think about, if I do another podcast, what is another vantage point that I can come from in this sort of space?
And I definitely appreciate the wholeness you're bringing, right? Like, we can't just piece out one of these issues as a separate thing. I mean, of course you can, and that's what's happening all the time, but I just want to lift up the value of nesting something as an integrated whole. And then, like you're saying earlier, like, if you actually create a whole fiber system, you actually get a whole economy and a whole culture. You get this, we like to say, cascading benefits, right, coming out of it. So it's not just like, oh, it's a nice piece of clothing that you could feel good about and you look good. It's like, the soil's healthy, the people are healthy, the environment is healthy, and we look good, right? And then now we get to celebrate together, right? So then there's this whole richness or abundance of yields. Can you talk more about Fibershed or even the concept? I mean, some of our listeners might know about that, but I wouldn't assume necessarily.
Sure. Well, Fibershed specifically, the organization that I am referring to is based in Northern California, started by Rebecca Burgess, who is the executive director. I have been working with and consulting with Fibershed on a variety of projects since 2019. And the ethos of Fibershed is essentially that we're borrowing from the soil for our clothing. And so how do we create bioregional soil to soil systems to create our textiles, our fabrics, our fibers from soil to soil and create a regional culture around that textile production, manufacturing, and the connection to land, essentially. And I think this idea of borrowed from the soil, which came to Rebecca, is this idea that everything eventually goes back to the earth, and how it goes back to the earth is part of the issue with textile waste. Can these things go back to the earth without poisoning them? Can they go back to the earth without destroying the earth for future generations? And I think the indigenous saying is that we're borrowing the earth from future generations, right? Or we're leasing it, that essentially it's not ours to destroy because we're sharing it with the people who are not yet born. So I think the idea of fiber sheds is that within a particular bioregion or territory that's ecologically determined, not man-made borders or determined by man-made structures, there is enough material to create a garment from the soil that the plant is grown from, or the grass that the sheep are eating, to the production in a potentially carbon neutral manufacturing plant, to the sewing, to the wearing and experiencing over and over again, and maybe sharing and regifting to a friend. And that after that long life cycle, where at every stage of the supply network, folks are getting paid, they're living in dignity, they have right livelihoods. After all of that, that garment can go back to the soil to create the nutrients for that cycle to continue. So rather than being a linear model of take, make, waste, it's circular. Everything goes back into the earth because ultimately this is our only home. So Fibershed works on a variety of initiatives and projects to uplift this bioregional model and to essentially engineer and work with small farmers and fiber producers to create these alternative natural fiber systems that are climate beneficial and community beneficial. And so this year, there's a lot of things happening, but one of the things that's coming up is an opportunity to give designers in Northern California some opportunity, resources, and material that's climate beneficial so that they can work with climate beneficial material. They can go visit the farms of the places that their fiber comes from and really understand the agency and decisions that a designer is able to make to support this type of bioregional apparel production. And also just like doing more workshops at the Fibershed Learning Center in Point Reyes on natural dyeing, on weaving, on looming, on growing grasses that you could use to make baskets and indigenous cultural forms. So Fibershed is just a really great resource as an organization. And the idea of fiber sheds, I think, harkens back to some of the things I mentioned in my podcast, which is that most indigenous communities were living in fiber sheds. They were creating in community from the soil and from the environment the material conditions of their lives, because that was the span of their lives. This was before modern day globalization. Of course, trade happened, but mostly you were using what was in your bioregion because that's what you had access to and that's what you knew as tools, as technology. You know, my dad's an anthropologist and he says the hoe, which is an agricultural tool, was a technological tool at that time because it allowed humans to advance production. So I think part of this is reclaiming what technology means and looking at indigenous lifeways and indigenous practices as a model to create futures that are more sustainable, even in the midst of technological advancements and the internet and the cloud and all kinds of other artificial intelligence that is rapidly integrating into our lives and society.
Wow. Thank you. Big, important work that Fibershed is doing. And it occurs to me this question that's the way it was. And then it became cheap, right, through fossil fuels and technology to not be constrained to your bioregion. And then, of course, there's, through racialized capitalism, they developed this extraction model of where can you get the materials the cheapest, then move them somewhere else around the world to where you can get the labor the cheapest, and then move them somewhere else around the world where you can sell them for the most, or sell more quantity or whatever, right? There needs to be some kind of discipline, right? Where we say, yes, we could do that, but that's actually not a good use of resources. So let's still recognize and honor our bioregional constraints, these actual constraints, where the mountains are, where the watersheds go, right? What grows there, what the climate supports. How do you see that transition coming about on a wider scale? And also refer to one thing I love about Fibershed is, as you shared, is founded in Northern California, but they never thought this is just about Northern California, right? It was conceived as this repatterning of old systems plus new technologies, but that can be replicated in every bioregion, right? That's the way forward, is we need to kind of get back within the planetary boundaries, recognize where things are actually coming, use them there. And then maybe there's a little bit of trade of surplus and such, but you're not trading raw material. You're trading finished goods. And so, okay, maybe we're rich in linens, etc., and we have a surplus and we can take it, and then we trade a little bit of that for some other things. But mostly you're trying to meet needs in any given bioregion, right? So what's our potential way forward with this inertia of the massive industrialized fashion industry?
Mm-hmm. I just want to add some texture to the comment about Fibershed as not only being based in Northern California. And I think rather than thinking, well, how do we replicate this in fiber sheds around the world? Part of the thinking was, what are the fiber sheds around the world, and what are people in those bioregions already doing, and can we give them resources and support as a US-based organization to uplift the work that they're doing? And if there have been historical fiber sheds in that area that no longer exist, can we support the holders of that wisdom to continue to share that wisdom with the generations that are doing land-based work or not now? And thinking about the fact that Fibershed didn't create fiber sheds. Fiber sheds exist, right? Like there are fiber sheds. There have been, as indigenous cultures as know. And so how do we reclaim that human legacy, that indigenous human legacy of having fiber sheds, and what paradigm shift needs to happen to support people becoming aware of this? So I think part of what's happening now is a paradigm shift in the fashion industry, consumers wanting to know more about where their clothes come from, how they're made. They want more transparency. I think this is a general shift in awareness, not only because of the internet, but because the younger generation in some ways is able to experience and consume so much at once that they can ask more questions because there's more things that they can see. So I think what is needed really is a paradigm shift in how we value the material conditions of our life, and deeper thinking about how is all of this stuff that we use on a daily basis made? Where does it come from? And if ultimately when we ask that question, the answer is the earth, our first thought needs to be, oh, we need to go directly there. Like if everything that we have comes from the planet and this is the only place we can live as human animals, then how do we start with the planet? And so there needs to be a continuing transformation of our awareness of our daily lives and how we can continue to live our daily lives if the things that make up this life is threatened right now, which is the planet. And so, as I said, like just transform everything. Everyone's thinking. I think the way that happens is through culture, through music, through art, through relationships, through conversations, through education to the degree possible, knowing that our educational system has its own agenda. And mostly what I'm focused on right now is how do we create that awareness through alternatives? If I tell you that I can give you a sweater and tell you everyone involved in making that sweater, I think you might value that sweater more. If I can give it to you and show you, then you know that what we do when we go to the store and just buy something is not the only way. And so I think the way to increase awareness for folks is to let them know it's not just it is what it is. There are other ways, and we're building them right now. And here are the small opportunities to participate in these alternatives. Because I can talk about how terrible capitalism is all day, and someone's still going to ask me, well, we all use smartphones, right? And I could still critique a system that I'm forced to live in, but they are right. And we know that the Congo is a site of mass extraction and that most of the minerals that we need for our laptops and our computers and our phones come from the Congo. So what do we do to support alternative creations of materials and products that are not extracting and ruining lives in the Congo? And how do I say to a person who has that critique, well, I can't help you with your cell phones right now, but actually I can help you with your clothes, right? Like, you don't have to participate in Zara or Forever 21 or Shein. Like, there is an alternative being built for this. We're working on the alternative for that other thing, but also just because we don't yet have an alternative doesn't mean we shouldn't question and critique and debate about why we are forced to live in what we're forced to live in. It wasn't always this way, so it doesn't always have to be. It's what I always say.
So not a limited thinking, right? Of it's either this or that, because the infrastructure is not there just to flip into total sustainable, fiber shed, providing all the fiber for humanity.
And I think part of the issue is colonialism created binary thinking. It's this or that. And if it's not or this or that, it doesn't exist. And I think the opportunity is to make space for complexity rather than obscure it, and pluralism. There are many solutions. There are many opportunities. There are many ways to shift. It could be alternative fiber systems. It could be alternative nail polish. It could be alternative cell phones. Like, there is so many different ways that we can solve issues. So it's not this or that. It's actually this and everything else.
Right. And then back to just actual garments. One of the themes, right, is instead of I have 20 or 30 cheaply made garments, it's maybe I have a couple, but they're really nicely made. And maybe I even know some people, and then they actually last longer, right?
Mm-hmm.
But part of the tension around that is it's going to cost more. And so I don't know if you have thoughts about like navigating that, especially in terms of, positionality, accessibility for things that can be quite expensive. And they should be expensive, right? It takes a lot of excellence to create the soil and all the processing and a beautiful garment and design it and all of that. So it shouldn't be cheap.
But also expensive is relative, right? Because like, for some people, $100 for a sweater is not expensive if they understand that this is an investment, and rather than getting 5 sweaters that I'll have to throw away in the next 2 years, I will get this one sweater for $100 and it'll last me 5 years, and then maybe I could repurpose it into something else. But I think what's really important to me is for folks to recognize that there are different ways to engage with more sustainable consumerism. And if you do not have a lot of money, or even if you do and you want to spend it on something else, you don't have to buy that $100 sweater yet. But maybe rather than buying online where things are coming from thousands of miles away, you go to the store in your neighborhood, right? And so when I'm in Brooklyn, everything that I buy, if I can buy it in my neighborhood or in walking distance, I do. Even if I know it might be easier to find on the internet, even if I have to go to 3 different stores, if I can walk to get something, I will do that, because at least I know I'm not participating in having it shipped from thousands of miles away. So I think it's like thinking about the ways that you already consume and how can you do that more sustainably. Maybe buy from local designers as opposed to big fashion chains, so that you could support your local economy. Someone who lives in your neighborhood, who if you give them this money, it goes to the rent in that building that you see that they live in, right? So then you also feel more connected to what you're buying because you know the people it supports. To me, that's another way to consume differently. And I think if we find multiple ways to consume more consciously and more intentionally, then hopefully as we build these alternative apparel systems, people will start to want to spend more money in them, but also they will be less expensive because more folks will be participating in them. And we also know that sort of outsourcing is subsidized. So if we subsidize domestic production, then that decreases the price and makes it more accessible to everyone. So all of these different angles, I feel like, should be seen as ways to consume more sustainably. If you cannot afford, do not have access to an 100% organic cotton made sweater made completely in California.
Right. So yeah, plurality of solutions.
And experiences based on your positionality. Not everyone has access to all of these alternatives. So what are ways you can at least support your local economy and the people that you know, rather than these chains that don't care about us and don't care about your community?
I mean, my thing I've always done, and obviously there's, like you're saying, plurality of solutions, and there's more to explore, but it's buying really nice clothes that somebody's already worn and has sold back. And now it's just this little store that's a consignment or a retailer. Mm-hmm. And I always get something interesting.
Yep.
It's not what I thought I was going to get, but It's whatever I found that fits me, and okay, let me try that out.
And it's better quality because it's still viable after however many years. I mean, I have a lot of my grandmother's clothes that she got in like the 70s. These are like 50-year-old clothes, but they're still together. In some places she sewed up or I've sewed up, but I also mostly anything I buy, if I can buy it secondhand, I will. And I always notice that they are usually made of more natural fibers because decades ago we were using more natural fibers. And a lot of times they're made in the US. Like up until 1960, about 98% of the clothes that were bought in the US are made in the US. Now that's less than 3%. Also, in the last decades, synthetic fibers have overrun natural fibers as being the main fiber. So now most of our clothes are not made from fiber, they're made from petroleum, acrylic, polyester. Those are all petroleum products, which we know petrochemical plants or refineries have completely devastating impacts in communities of color and working class communities. And now most of our clothes are synthetic. So if I'm buying something that's made years ago, it's probably more likely made of natural fibers. And that already is better for my skin and the planet.
Which to me makes me think of repair, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like my wife just had the elbows on her cashmere sweaters patched.
Nice.
Right?
I love patches.
Right? Instead of throwing
Mm-hmm.
them out and buying new sweaters.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And if you're in Northern California, FiberShed has a mending bar that happens every month where you could bring your clothes and someone will, if you don't know how to sew or mend or patch, someone there will help you do it. So I've gone and some old jeans that I didn't want to give away that had holes, like someone helped me patch them up. So find folks in your community who know how to sew and patch and use seamstresses to maintain clothes as long as possible because mostly we don't need to throw them away when we're ready to throw them away.
Or if you do take them that far, remember quilts?
Mm-hmm. Also, repurpose.
That's how that came about, right?
Yeah.
It's like, oh, okay, the knees are out, but here, this piece of fabric works, and you cut them up into little squares, and then, make a blanket or whatever. So, yeah, this idea of like using the quality things that we have instead of throwing it out and buying the cheap thing.
Mm-hmm. Or give it to an upcycling designer who can't afford material and so takes scraps of fabric. Like tons of designers are doing that now. So I'm sure there's someone in your community or city that is a designer who would love to take some old fabric off your hands and repurpose it into something cool.
So this is great. There's some curiosity involved, right? Like you have to find out who's in your neighborhood who's doing like that. So is that the way, or is there also like, can you tell us, are there any brands or anything that people might know about on a wider scale that are doing good work that you could refer to? Or is it more like this, get curious in the grassroots and buy used and upcycle and, local designer, some of the things you already mentioned?
I think like everything, there are levels. There are some big brands who are seen as doing better than they have done before. Some of that is greenwashing, but some of that is like they're responding to consumers who want to understand how their clothes are made and want clothes to be made in more ecologically friendly ways. But my thing is always like, look at who's next to you and around you, because that's where you not only find innovation and creativity, it's also how you know that you're supporting your community, because the people who live next to you and near you are going to be more impacted by the decisions you make than brands and big businesses who are not actually connected to you or your community. I also am working on creating a Black sustainable fiber and textile directory to create a map and a platform to find all of the Black upcycling designers, the indigenous weavers and loomers in South Africa and East Africa and West Africa, the Black cotton farmers in North America, the folks who are trying to create carbon neutral manufacturing facilities in Kenya. I want to create a directory. So if you want to engage specifically with people of African descent, Black people in natural fiber and sustainable textile supply networks, I want to be able to have a place where people can go to connect with each other, but also find others on different levels, small businesses, medium-sized businesses, individual fiber artists, one of the people who just sent in a form is an individual weaver from South Africa, right? I think she's Kosa, and she is trying to reclaim and maintain the textile weaving traditions and like found an old loom and weaves on this old loom. Like I want people to know about her. If they're in South Africa, they can go and learn. But if they're not, they still have a sense that this is possible and things are possible. So I don't think it makes sense to name any brands that may be known. I just say look within your community, look out for my directory whenever I get that together. And yeah, look at networks like Fibershed Network, right? I'm sure Lyft has a regenerative agricultural network. Like the resources and organizations that you already know, ask them if they have some information or resources based on the things you're already thinking about.
Thank you. What question do you not get asked, but you wish you did?
Yeah, I don't know. That is a great question. I'm not sure what questions I don't get asked. How do you know the questions you don't get asked? I think maybe the question that I don't get asked is why I have such a focus on Black people. I think most people are just like, it's because you're Black, or it's because we need racial justice. But yeah, I think that's, people just assume that my focus on Black people, they make assumptions about that. So it's never something I'm ever asked explicitly about. So maybe that's one of those questions.
So Teju, why is your work focused on Black people?
That's a good question, Sean. Thanks for asking.
I did my research on that one.
I think the main reason that my research is focused on Black people is because before we're Black, we're human. And I think when you are in a position where your racial category has overshadowed your humanity, that when you look at our lives, it forces you to contend with how we've designed a society that can look at race, which is made up, over humanity. And so the focus on Black people is to say, actually, this is a focus on all people. I'm just using Black people as a stand-in for humanity, as a stand-in for the way that humanity and society has designed a system that completely excludes humanity from the reason of being for the system. And so also, I just love us. I love Black people. I think we're great, but I also think we're a good representation of the will and the natural state of being human, and being denied that even when we're standing in our very human state on the planet at all times.
So uplifting the humanity and the beauty coming out of Black culture.
And the resilience, just like, as despite all of these things that we do to each other, we're still here and we're still connected to the earth. And so when it comes down to it, it's like, how do we just make life better for all people? And if we make life better for Black people, I do believe it'll be better for all people.
Hear that? Well, thank you for your work. What's next for you?
So for sure, the Integrated Capital Fibers Fund, that is going to be the project of the next several years. I'm really excited, hoping we could launch this year and support small businesses who are producing natural-based fibers and natural plant dyes. We're also going to have a Black fiber cohort for emerging Black fiber businesses. I'm also facilitating a legal working group to get climate displaced people protection. So that's something I'm really excited about, because climate displaced refugees are a growing number of refugees from the Caribbean and Latin America. And so I think we need to really have some policy and legal frameworks around how to protect them and how to protect the folks that are being displaced by the changing nature of the planet and the climate apocalypse that we're all living through. And lots of good work happening this year with Black farmers and supporting them and their sustainability practices, mostly with an organization called Seed to Shirt, who I love to work with, and maybe some other cool redevelopment projects coming up in the works that I can't talk about right now. But yeah, lots of things to just really create infrastructure for transforming the system. That's my focus this year. Like, how do I support the infrastructure that aids in transforming everything, starting with fiber and community?
So for the Integrated Capital Fibers Fund, what do you need? And maybe
we need investment dollars.
Yeah,
we need investment dollars. We are doing a capital raise. This is starting off as a $10 million catalytic fund. We already have our first $1 million investment, which is super exciting. And we're hoping to raise a couple more million before starting to deploy capital. So any folks who know funders, who know investors, because it's an integrated capital model, you can give grants or investments into the fund, because we're supporting businesses with different forms of capital. So if anyone is interested in hearing more, they can reach out to me. That's a really great way to support my work right now.
And can you share how they would get in touch with you or the fund, et cetera? And we'll link in the show notes and everything.
Yes, so they can email me. And if you don't have my email, I'm not going to say it here, you can go through my website and contact me, and I will get back to you through there. That's the best way to reach me, through my website, tejuadisa-farrar.com, my name.com.
Anything else you want to share with the listeners of how they can help support your work?
Just send me a message if you have any ideas. If you know anyone who would consider themselves a Black sustainable fiber or textile producer, designer, researcher, farmer, they can also contact me to be a part of the directory. And yeah, I'm always happy to talk to folks about this work and share any resources that I have. Actually, on my website, I do have a resource list. So happy to continue to share resources for folks who are interested.
Well, Teju, thank you so much for being with us, and thank you for your work. We're huge supporters, and we will help support your work.
Thank you so much, Sean.
Thanks for being here.
Next Economy Now is a production of Lift Economy. To listen to all of our episodes, go to lifteconomy.com/podcast. That's LIFT economy.com/podcast. You can also sign up for our monthly newsletter at lifteconomy.com/newsletter. Please also rate and review our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.